Welcome to Where Old Gods Sleep. Find a comfortable position, take a slow, deep breath, and let the day gently fall away as we begin. Under a small lamp, while the house of the present grows still, an old longing is given room, the wish to carry home whatever the dark seems to withhold. The gods remembered in this hour are not called with trumpets. Their stairways are broken, their incense has long faded from the stone, and yet their stories wait patiently for lamplight. The first waits beside the reed beds of Sumer, where the Euphrates moved through the night like a strip of polished clay. Eridu lay low among marshes and canals, older in memory than many kings. At its heart stood the house of Enki, lord of the sweet waters beneath the earth, keeper of deep counsel and the strange powers by which a city became more than mud walls. In the cool chambers of his temple, jars of beer stood sealed with clay. Date syrup darkened the rims of bowls. Fish stirred in the black water beyond the quay. From Uruk came Inanna, bright and watchful, with her faithful minister Ninshuba. Uruk was strong, but it still longed for the fullness held in Eridu, the art that steadied a loom, the order that gave weight to a throne, the song awakened by drum skin, the difficult customs by which human beings loved, judged, mourned, and began again. These powers were called the Me, and Enki kept them close in the deep house of wisdom. He welcomed Inanna generously. His minister Isamad set food before her, and the beer was poured. Cup followed cup beneath the temple lamps. Enki's laughter loosened the stillness of the Abzu. Inanna listened. She praised him, answered him, and waited while his caution softened. Then Enki began to give. He gave a power, and Inanna accepted it. He gave another, and she accepted that too. The night deepened. Reed shadows crossed the walls. What had been guarded in Eridu passed, promise by promise, into her hands. Inanna did not leave the gifts resting on the floor. She gathered them into the boat of heaven, where they seemed to weigh nothing and everything at once. Before the first pale line touched the eastern marsh, the boat had slipped from the quay. When the beer cloud lifted, Enki looked around his temple and felt the sudden hollowness of a room after music. He asked Isamad where the sacred offices had gone, where kingship had gone, where song and craft and counsel had gone. Each time the answer returned, Enki had given them to his daughter. By then the boat of heaven was already moving toward Uruk. ETCSL or 1. Regret came upon the water god in waves. He sent messengers after Inanna. At one landing, servants of the deep tried to seize the boat. At another, strong guardians rose from the canal. Great fish troubled the water, and old powers of Eridu reached for the prow. Each time Isamad called out that Enki wanted the vessel returned. Each time Inanna answered that a spoken gift could not be made unspoken merely because dawn had arrived. And each time she turned to Ninshuba. Ninshuba stood firm at the rope and the steering oar. The boat passed reed bank and field mound, holy landing and dark bend. Water slapped softly against its sides. The divine powers remained aboard. It was not a clean theft, nor a simple gift. It was a promise taken seriously after the giver wished to forget it. At last the walls of Uruk rose from the plain. The boat entered through the gate of joy. People gathered in the streets while drums sounded and beer shone in offering bowls. The old received counsel. Children found reason to laugh. Craftspeople touched wood, wool, clay, and metal with new assurance. Inanna had brought home not perfection, but the whole burden of civilization, its beauty, its danger, its tenderness, and its noise. Far behind, in Eridu, Enki ceased sending pursuers. The deep water settled. The gift had crossed into another keeping, and even a god of wisdom could recognize what the river had decided. May every small thing still missing find a quiet way home to you. The river reeds bend westward, and in their hush another stolen gift begins to root in foreign earth. In the old lands of Wales, rain travelled softly over the hills of Dyfed and silvered the roofs of Prydary's Hall. Beyond the dark folds of Ceredigion, the mountains of Gwynedd held their own weather. Standing stones watched empty roads. Sheep slept behind low walls. In that age, before every useful creature had found its place beside a human hearth, a strange herd came from Annwn, the other world. The pigs belonged to Prydary, son of Pwyll. Arawn, lord of Annwn, had sent them as a gift, and they were unlike any animals then known in the island. Their bodies were low and quick. Their dark snouts turned the earth with patient strength. They fattened where cattle would have found little, and their meat was prized. At night they breathed together in their enclosure while mist gathered on the wooden rails. Far to the north, Math son of Mathenwy ruled from Caer Dathel. His nephew Gwydion was a magician, a maker of appearances, and a teller whose voice could hold a hall quiet. He heard of Prydary's pigs and shaped a plan around them. The plan had another purpose hidden inside it, a purpose unkind enough to draw Math away from his own house. The old story gives Gwydion brilliance, but it does not make his cleverness innocent. He travelled south with 11 companions dressed as bards. They came to Prydary's court at evening, when the bronze cups had been filled and the fire had fallen to a red glow. Gwydion told stories. His words moved like hunting dogs through fern, like white birds over the sea. The household listened until the night seemed wider than the roof above them. When the hall had grown friendly, Gwydion asked for the pigs. Prydary refused. The animals had come from Annwn under a condition: they could not simply be given away, nor could they be sold. Gwydion accepted the answer with the calm face of a guest. Then he stepped outside among the wet trees and gathered fungus from the earth, old bark, and the pale shapes that grow where roots keep their secrets. By enchantment he made 12 proud horses. Their harness shone as though worked in gold. He made 12 white-breasted greyhounds with bright collars and leashes. He made 12 shields whose round faces gleamed in the rain. In the morning he brought this splendid company before Prydary and offered an exchange. A gift was forbidden. A sale was forbidden. But a trade seemed to pass between the words of the old condition. Prydary's councillors looked upon the horses, hounds, and shields and saw no flaw. The bargain was made. Gwydion led the pigs north before the sun could measure another full day, for he knew the truth of his craft. The horses, hounds, and shields had been formed from fungus, and the enchantment would not outlive its appointed hour. Internet Sacred Text Archive 2. The herd moved along narrow tracks through Ceredigion and Melanid. Hooves pressed the wet ground. At each stopping place, a sty was raised, and old place names were later said to remember the passage of the swine. Gwydion hurried them toward the fastness of Gwynedd while clouds gathered behind him. In Prydary's court, gold dulled into damp yellow flesh. Fine bridles collapsed into stems and threads. Greyhounds became the pale growth of the woodland floor. Prydary understood that the letter of his promise had been obeyed and its heart had been stolen. He called his people, and the roads filled with men traveling north. The tale that followed was sorrowful. The hidden purpose of Gwydion's scheme brought harm to Math's household, and Prydary did not return to Dyfed. Later, Math's judgment fell upon Gwydion and his brother, and they learned for a long while what it meant to live in the shapes of hunted creatures. Cleverness had brought the pigs across Wales, but it had not carried peace with them. Still, the animals remained. They rooted beneath oak and hazel. They fed households through lean weather. A gift from Annwn, taken by false splendor, entered the ordinary work of farms and kitchens. A useful thing had crossed the hills by a crooked road. May what nourishes life reach you by a gentler path. Beyond the misted hills, a smaller creature watches smoke gather beneath a folded wing. Across the dry lands of southern Africa, night could empty the world of heat. The stones that had burned beneath the sun cooled quickly. Thorn branches became black writing against the stars, and families drew close beneath rock shelters while wind moved over the grass. In an old sand story, this was a time before people kept fire. Food was eaten as it came. Hands found no ember waiting in ash. Darkness had no small red heart. Mantis lived among the people, restless, watchful, and never entirely satisfied with the way things had been arranged. He was slight enough to vanish beside a stem of grass, yet his thoughts traveled everywhere. He noticed what others passed without question: a broken seed case, a track crossing its own path, a smell that did not belong to the cold air. The smell came whenever Ostrich ate. Ostrich stood tall on the open plain, his long legs pale beneath the moon. He was proud of his speed and careful with his secrets. When he found roots or hard fruit, he turned away from the others. A faint thread of smoke rose near his breast. Soon the food in his beak smelled softened and rich, unlike anything the people knew. Mantis watched from behind a stone. Beneath Ostrich's broad wing, hidden close to the body, a small fire glowed. Ostrich carried it wherever he went. He opened his feathers only enough to warm his own food, then folded them tightly again. No coal dropped to the ground. No spark escaped into the grass. He alone possessed the warmth that could sweeten a root, harden a wooden point, and hold the night at a little distance. Mantis asked for a share. Ostrich pressed his wing closer and said there was nothing there. The smoke thinned. The secret disappeared beneath black and white feathers. Mantis did not argue. A trickster often leaves by the same path on which the true plan arrives. Some days later he found a tree heavy with fruit. The lower branches had been stripped by animals, but the highest boughs still carried dark clusters that shone in the afternoon light. Mantis went to Ostrich and spoke admiringly of his height. No one else, he said, could reach such fruit. No one else had legs made for standing so near the sky. Ostrich followed him to the tree. He stretched his neck and took a piece of fruit. Mantis pointed higher. The sweetest ones, he said, remained above. Ostrich rose on the tips of his toes. Still Mantis pointed upward. At last Ostrich lifted both wings to balance himself, spreading the guarded feathers wide. The hidden fire breathed. Mantis darted beneath the lifted wing, seized a living coal, and ran. Ostrich folded himself too late. The little thief crossed the dust with the ember held carefully before him, its smoke trailing like a thin grey ribbon. Behind him came the heavy beat of Ostrich's feet, but Mantis knew the small paths between stones and roots. He turned where a larger body could not turn. He slipped where long legs could not follow. The coal remained bright. Gateway-Africa.com 3. He brought it to the people before darkness settled. Dry grass received the ember. Resinous twigs caught its glow. Someone laid a branch across the new flame, then another. The first hearth rose gently, not as a blaze across the plain, but as a circle of warmth upon the earth. Faces appeared in its light. Food changed over the coals. Tough roots softened. Smoke entered hides and hair. Sparks climbed a little way toward the stars and went out. Ostrich kept what remained of his fire, but from that day he held his wings close to his sides. The The story says he no longer trusted the open air beneath them, and the sky was lost to him. Mantis, meanwhile, had stolen what one creature guarded and made it common around many hearths. Fire could burn, and the people knew that. Yet in the coldest hour its gentler meaning was enough, a place where bodies rested near one another, where food gave out its hidden fragrance, and where darkness stopped at the rim of light. May one quiet ember keep the cold far from you. The first coal glows, and beyond the dunes a thirsty black bird listens for hidden water. Along the rainy coast of the Tlingit, the mountains rose straight from salt water and wore cedar forests to their shoulders. Islands lay under veils of mist. In the longhouses, carved posts watched the central fire, and beyond the shore the tide breathed among stones. Yet in the first days of Raven's wandering, the world had no free-running water to drink. The sea was everywhere, cold and shining, but fresh water belonged to one keeper. Raven had already passed through many shapes and many troubles. He was maker, beggar, glutton, child, old man, and black-winged thought. Wherever something had been shut away, he felt its absence as an invitation. The people were thirsty. Salmon waited for streams that had not yet been poured across the land. Moss held only a little rain. The keeper of the spring was Petrol, called Garuda in the old account. He lived in a great house and slept beside the water. A heavy cover rested over the spring so that no cup could be dipped without waking him. The sound beneath it was faint, a secret movement under wood. Raven came as a guest. He sat near Petrol and spoke of distant happenings. He described things beyond the doorway, hoping curiosity would draw the keeper outside. Petrol listened without rising. Raven told another tale, then another. He made the unseen world sound very busy, but Petrol understood the ways of a trickster and remained beside his spring. Evening lowered over the roof. Smoke curled toward the opening above. Raven asked to sleep in the house and called Petrol his brother-in-law, speaking with the easy closeness of kin. Petrol allowed it. The two lay down while the covered water whispered between them. Near morning, Raven heard Petrol's breathing deepen. He rose without stirring the floor mats. From outside he brought back a little filth and smeared it upon Petrol's bedding, making it seem that the keeper had soiled his own blankets in sleep. Then Raven cried out in concern and urged him to carry the blankets into the open air. Petrol woke in confusion. Ashamed and annoyed, he gathered the bedding and stepped outside. Raven crossed the house in an instant. He lifted the cover from the spring and drank. The water was cold enough to ache in his beak. He swallowed and swallowed until almost nothing remained, holding the great gift within himself. When Petrol returned, Raven was already beating his wings toward the smoke hole. Petrol called to the spirits who guarded the opening. They caught Raven there, wedged between house and sky. Beneath him Petrol piled pitchwood on the fire. Thick smoke rose around the thief. It entered his feathers and turned them from white to the deep black they have carried ever since. Still Raven would not release the water. He closed his beak and endured until the smoke-hole spirits let him pass. Wikisource 4. Outside, he flew through the wet air with soot on his wings and the world's rivers in his mouth. Near the Nass he let the first great stream fall. Farther on, more water escaped and ran as the Stykine, broad beneath the mountains. The Toku received another shining mouthful. As Raven traveled northward, river after river unfolded below him, while the smallest drops became salmon creeks threading the forest floor. Water found gravel beds, roots, and low valleys. It gathered under fern and alder. It learned the patient curve toward the sea. Raven had wanted the spring because he was thirsty, and perhaps because petrol had said no. Yet what he stole could not remain private once he carried it over the land. His beak was not ajar. Every breath gave something away. The rivers became paths for fish, drinking places for animals, and cold mirrors beside human dwellings. Petrol kept his empty spring house. Raven kept his dark feathers. The land kept the water. May a clear stream sound softly through the dark beside you. The new rivers travel south in dream, toward stone temples where even a god's name can be guarded. In Egypt, the Nile carried moonlight between banks of black soil, and the desert beyond the fields held its silence like a sealed room. Temple pylons stood against the stars. On their walls, Ra crossed the sky in painted boats, crowned with the sun disk, forever bright. Yet one old tale remembered an hour when even the sun god had grown weary. Ra had ruled for a long span of years. Each morning he rose over the eastern horizon, and each evening he passed toward the west. Age had touched him in the manner of gods, not with an ending, but with heaviness. His steps slowed. Moisture sometimes fell from his mouth onto the ground as he traveled, and the dust received it. Isis watched. She was great in magic and patient in thought. She knew the public names of Ra, the names sung in temples and cut into stone. None of them was the hidden name that rested within him, the name joined to his deepest power. That one he kept beyond every priest and god. Isis wanted it not as an ornament, but as a key. Her son Horus would need protection in a dangerous world, and a mother who knew the sun's secret name would not stand helpless before many forms of harm. One morning, where Ra's moisture had darkened the path, Isis gathered the damp earth. She kneaded dust and divine spittle between her palms until it held a living shape. From it she made a small serpent, silent and unrecognized, for Ra had not created it and therefore did not know its nature. Isis laid it beside the road where the sun god would pass. The day brightened. Reeds whispered at the edge of a canal. Ra came with his attendants, and the little creature touched him. A strange pain entered the old god, cold within the heat of noon. He called out, and his company gathered around him with bronze bowls, linen, incense, and anxious voices. Ra searched his own knowledge. He knew the creatures of field, river, desert, and sky because his speech had called them forth. But this one was outside his naming. The pain moved through him like shadow under a door. Isis came among the healers. She asked Ra what had happened. He told her that something he did not know had reached him, and that his body trembled between heat and cold. Isis spoke gently. A true name, she said, could draw out what ordinary remedies could not touch. If Ra gave her the name hidden in his heart, her words would have a path to the place where the pain had settled. Ra answered with the names by which the world already knew him. He spoke of his making, his light, and his daily journeys. Isis listened, but the serpent's power remained. Those names belonged to hymns and doorways. They were not the one she sought. The shadows shortened. Even the great disk seemed pale above the temple roofs. At last Ra understood that secrecy had become heavier than surrender. He sent the other gods away. In the stillness between him and Isis, he allowed the hidden name to pass from his body into hers, unseen as breath moving between two sealed chambers. Then Isis spoke the healing words. She called upon the secret she now carried. The strange power loosened. The pain withdrew from Ra and went out into the dust from which the serpent had been shaped. His warmth returned. The sun steadied over Egypt. Isis had taken what Ra would never willingly have shared, but she also restored him with it. The surviving Egyptian tale joined her theft and her cure so closely that neither can be remembered without the other. University College London, 5. Afterward, Ra kept his course across the sky, and Isis kept the name. In houses where sickness entered quietly, people repeated the pattern of the story. The hidden thing was named, the harmful thing was commanded to depart, and a mother's cunning stood beside the bed. A name can be a door, and sometimes mercy enters through a door opened by daring hands. May the name of what troubles you grow faint and release its hold. From the breath of a secret name, the night lifts into the wide path of a golden bird. Far to the east of the Nile, another night lay over the forests and river plains of ancient India. Banyan roots descended into shadow. Sacred grass bent beneath the dew. In the house of the sage Kashyapa, 2 sisters had once made a wager, and deceit had turned the losing word into bondage. Vinata, mother of birds, served her sister Kadru, mother of serpents. The burden was not iron around the wrist. It was the quieter weight of command, carrying another's wishes, lowering the eyes, waiting for a promise to end. Her great son Garuda saw this and could not rest. Garuda had broken from his egg bright as a second fire. His wings were wide enough to trouble the air, and his feathers held the color of the sun before noon. When he asked the serpents what price would purchase Vinata's freedom, they named a thing beyond ordinary reach. He must bring them Amrita, the nectar guarded by the gods, the drink that held death at a distance. Garuda agreed. He did not desire the nectar for himself. The jar mattered because his mother's life had narrowed around an old deception, and love had made the impossible price seem exact. He rose from the earth. Forests flattened beneath the wind of his wings. Mountains passed below like dark islands. At the border of the gods' keeping, a wall of flame climbed into the sky, circling the Amrita. Garuda drew water from rivers and clouds, carrying coolness in many streams, and beat it against the fire until a passage opened. Beyond the flame turned a great wheel. Its rim shone sharp and swift, and its spokes crossed too quickly for a broad-winged creature to enter. Garuda hovered before it. Strength could not slow the wheel, so he chose smallness. He folded his splendor inward, diminished his body, and slipped through the moving spokes at the single breath of space between them. 2 serpents guarded the vessel beyond. Their gaze was fierce and wakeful. Garuda stirred dust with the edge of a wing until their eyes closed against it. In the dimness he passed them, took the jar in his claws, and rose again. The nectar remained sealed. The gods came to stop him. Weapons flashed in the upper air, but Garuda did not linger in anger. Even when Indra's thunderbolt reached him, the great bird honored the power from which it had been fashioned and let one feather fall, though the blow did not turn him from his path. The feather drifted downward, broad and beautiful, while Garuda carried the unopened Amrita on. Vishnu met him between heaven and earth. The god saw that Garuda possessed the drink of immortality and had not tasted a drop. He asked what boon the bird desired. Garuda asked to be deathless without drinking from the stolen jar. The boon was granted. In return, Garuda offered his strength and became the bearer of Vishnu, flying with the god above him and his own emblem above the god's banner. Indra also came in peace. Garuda told him the truth: the nectar was ransom, not hunger. Once Vinata had been released, Indra could reclaim it before the serpents drank. Thus the thief and the guardian made a quiet agreement in the open sky. Vyasa Online, 6. Garuda descended where Kadru's serpent sons waited. He set the jar upon clean kusar grass and told them to free Vinata before touching it. The old bond was ended. Vinata stood beneath her son's wings with no command upon her. Then Garuda advised the serpents to purify themselves before drinking. While they went to the water, Indra took back the Amrita. The jar returned to the gods unopened, and the serpents found only shining drops upon the sharp grass. They had kept their word, Garuda had kept his, and Vinata was free. What Garuda stole was not finally the nectar. It was a mother's life returned to her own keeping. He had carried immortality without claiming it, and so the greater gift came from restraint. May the freedom won for love spread its quiet wings above you. The sealed nectar remains unopened, while farther north another drink waits behind a mountain door. In the north, winter night gathered early around farmsteads and fjords. Snow held the last light upon its surface, and smoke rose straight from turf roofs when the air was still. Beyond the paths of people stood Nitjorg, the mountain of Suttanga, closed around a drink that could loosen wisdom into words. The mead had begun with Kvesa, the being made when the two families of Norse gods ended their quarrel and mingled tokens of peace. Kvesa traveled widely, answering questions wherever a bench was offered to him. No thought seemed too knotted for his patience. But two dwarfs took his life and mixed what remained of his wisdom with honey. The drink they brewed could make a poet or a scholar of anyone who tasted it. After another sorrow, the mead came into the keeping of the giant Suttanga. He hid it inside Nitjorg in 3 vessels and set his daughter Gunlo to guard them. Stone closed around the chamber. No road entered. Outside, frost whitened the mountain grass. Inside, the mead waited in darkness, holding all the speech that had not yet found a mouth. Odin heard of it. He knew the hunger that lives behind silence, the wish to shape grief, praise, memory, and wonder into words another heart can carry. Yet Suttanga would not share his treasure. So Odin put aside the look of a god and called himself Bolverka. He came to Borgi, Suttanga's brother, at harvest time and offered to do the work of many men for an entire summer. His price would be 1 drink of the hidden mead. Borgi agreed to ask. All summer Bolverka labored. The scythe whispered through grass. Hay dried beneath a pale sun. When winter approached, Borgi led him to Suttanga and requested the promised draught. Suttanga refused even a drop. Then Odin brought out an auger named Rati. Borgi drilled into the mountain while Odin waited with his face near the stone. The first time, Borgi claimed the hole was finished, but when Odin blew into it, stone dust returned against his mouth. The passage had not gone through. Borgi drilled again. This time Odin's breath disappeared into the hidden chamber. He changed himself into a serpent and entered the narrow hole before Borgi could stop him. Within Nitjorg, Gunlo sat beside the 3 vessels. A small lamp made the mead shine darkly. Odin returned to his own shape and stayed with her for 3 nights. He spoke, persuaded, and gave promises whose keeping the old poems leave uneasy and incomplete. At last Gunlo allowed him 3 draughts. Odin drank the first vessel empty. With the second draught he emptied the next. With the third, he took all that remained. The mountain-stored poetry entered him in 3 long swallows. Then he became an eagle and flew through the passage into the winter sky. Suttanga saw the theft and took eagle shape as well. The 2 birds crossed the cold air toward Asgard, one carrying the mead and one closing behind him. The gods saw Odin's wings and set great vats in the courtyard. He reached them by the narrowest margin and released the mead into their keeping. A little went astray in the haste, falling wherever chance received it, but the greater portion was saved. Internet Sacred Text Archive 7. Odin shared the drink with the gods and with human beings able to make verse. Afterward, a thought too heavy for ordinary speech might become a poem beside a fire. A name might outlive the body that bore it. A lonely traveler might hear a song and recognize a sorrow not carried alone. The mead came by labor, seduction, broken trust, and theft. Poetry did not arrive spotless. Perhaps that is why it could speak of the whole human heart rather than only its cleanest chamber. May the words that matter most come softly and rest near you. One drop becomes a song, and the song rides westward on a wind with a feathered face. In the remembered world of the Nawa, the fifth sun moved above mountains and broad lakes, but the earth below had not yet learned music. Wind passed through maguey spines without becoming a flute. Hands struck wood and heard only wood. At evening, when villages darkened and the last birds folded their wings, no song traveled from one house to another. Tezcatlipoca listened to that emptiness. He was the smoking mirror, lord of change, night, and the sudden turn by which one condition becomes another. He knew that the sun kept musicians in his distant house, beyond the reach of ordinary roads. Their playing filled the bright courts of the sky while the earth remained without melody. He called Ehecatl the wind. Ehecatl wore the long red shape of the wind god at his face, and his breath could move over lake water without leaving a footprint. Tezcatlipoca asked him to go to the house of the sun and bring back singers and players. It was not a request the sun would welcome. Light guarded its own splendor closely. The wind traveled to the edge of the sea. There, powers of water, shell, and living current joined themselves into a path, and Ehecatl crossed toward the brilliant house. The air grew thin and hot. Ahead, walls shone as though made from the inside of daylight. Music sounded behind them, clear enough to make the dark earth seem very far away. The sun saw the visitor approaching. He warned the musicians not to answer any call from beyond his court. They were to remain silent and still, for the wind had come to carry them away. The players lowered their hands. The singers closed their mouths. A quiet stranger than the silence of earth entered the house of the sun, because here every instrument remembered the note it had been forbidden to make. Ehecatl stood outside and called. He spoke of the world below, the lakes without boat songs, the children without lullabies, the dancers whose feet had no drum to follow. No one answered. The sun blazed more fiercely, hoping heat would drive the wind away. But wind cannot be kept outside by a wall. Ehecatl circled the house. He entered cracks no finger could find. He lifted dust from the shining floor and stirred the feathers of the musicians' headdresses. Still they obeyed the sun. Then Tezcatlipoca's power darkened the distance, and thunder moved across the bright realm. Ehecatl called once more, not with command, but with the sound of the empty earth longing to be heard. One musician answered. The note was small. It trembled like a reed beside water. Yet once it had sounded, silence could not be restored. Another voice joined it. A drum awakened under a palm. Shell gave out its long sea breath. The musicians turned toward the wind, and the sun's order loosened around them. Ehecatl gathered them into his moving air and carried them from the house of the sun. The bright court receded. Across the living bridge they came, through cloud and storm, toward the patient earth. The old Nawa story remembers the wind bringing the sun's musicians away so that music entered the human world. EBSCO 8. Their arrival changed the night without making it less dark. Hollowed learned a deep voice. Reed and bone learned how breath could bend into longing. Song gave labor a rhythm and grief a form that could be shared. Feet found patterns on packed earth. A mother could send tenderness across a room without rising. The sun still crossed the sky, but no longer possessed every melody. Tezcatlipoca had desired change, Ehecatl had crossed the impossible distance, and the musicians themselves had broken silence. The stolen gift belonged nowhere entirely after that. Each song became new in the mouth that carried it. May a far-off music soften the edges of the night around you. Music settles over the earth, then thins into the whisper of a spider climbing toward the leaves. In the forest country of the Annwn, evening settled beneath broad leaves and along the paths between villages. Smoke from cooking fires rested low in the air. Mortars had gone quiet after the day's work, and the trunks of silk cotton trees rose into darkness like pillars in a roofless hall. Above them all, Naim kept the sky and watched the small affairs of earth. Anansi the spider was never content to leave a useful thing where it had been placed. His body was small, but his plans could crowd a whole room. He had once bargained for stories and carried them down from the sky. Now he heard that wisdom itself could be gathered, and he began to wonder whether it might also be owned. Naim entrusted him with a clay pot containing the wisdom of the world. It was not meant to sit in one house or serve one clever creature. Anansi was to share it, so that each person might have enough understanding for the work before them, how to settle a quarrel, when to plant, how to read a cloud, how to listen before speaking. Anansi accepted the pot. He looked into it and saw no single shining object. Wisdom lay there like deep water at night, reflecting whatever bent above it. The longer he held the vessel, the less he wished to pass it on. If everyone became wise, he thought, no one would need to come to Anansi for answers. No one would marvel at his schemes. So he decided to hide the pot where only he could reach it. He chose the tallest tree he could find. The trunk rose smooth and pale through the forest. Its upper branches disappeared among leaves brushed by moonlight. Anansi tied the pot against the front of his body and began to climb. At once the rounded clay pressed between him and the bark. His legs searched for holes. The cord tightened. He moved a little way, slipped, and began again. Below stood his young son, Ntikuma. The child watched without laughing. After a while he called upward that the pot might be easier to carry if Anansi tied it behind him instead. Then his body could lie close to the trunk and his hands would be free. Anansi stopped. All the wisdom in the world was resting against his belly, yet a child on the ground had seen what he had not. The thought pricked him more sharply than any thorn. If wisdom still lived outside the pot, then the vessel could not make him its sole master. Anger and embarrassment moved together in him. He tugged at the cord, and the clay pot slipped from his grasp. It struck a root and broke. The sound was small beneath the enormous tree, but what followed could not be gathered again. Wisdom rose from the shards like mist after rain. It entered the leaves, the insects, the paths, and the listening people. Some of it clung to the hands of farmers. Some settled beside hearths. Some traveled with hunters, weavers, healers, judges, and children. A portion ran into the river and was carried beyond the village. The Annwn tale remembers Anansi's attempt to keep the gift and the breaking of the pot that scattered it among everyone. Anik Foundation 9. Anansi climbed down slowly. The cord hung empty. At the foot of the tree, Ntikuma touched one of the fragments and said nothing. There was no use pretending the accident had been planned. Even a trickster must sometimes sit beside the pieces of his own cleverness. From then on, no person held every answer. One knew the safe ford. Another understood herbs. A grandmother remembered the words that eased a frightened child. Someone else knew how a drum should answer a dancer's foot. Wisdom had become partial, uneven, and shared. To receive it, people would have to ask, trade, teach, and listen. Anansi had tried to steal wisdom from the world. By failing, he gave the world back to itself. May the wisdom meant for all settle lightly within you. The scattered knowing drifts east with the night, bright as dust on the strings of a hidden Koto. On the coast of Izumo, where waves pressed long lines of foam against the sand, Okunanushi had many brothers and little peace. The old tales remembered him first as the gentlest among them, carrying burdens while others walked ahead. Yet gentleness did not keep him from danger. Pursued and worn thin by their jealousy, he went toward Eni-no-Kuni, the root country, where Susanoo lived beyond the ordinary roads. The land below was dim, but not empty. Great halls stood beneath shadowed slopes. Their beams smelled of old cedar. Lamps trembled in stone recesses, and somewhere in the dark a Koto waited with its strings unstirred. At the threshold Okunanushi met Susuriheim, daughter of Susanoo. They recognized one another quickly, as people in stories sometimes do when the road has already chosen its companions. She brought him before her father. Susanoo looked at the young traveler and gave him another name, then prepared a sleeping room filled with serpents. Susuriheim slipped Okunanushi a scarf and told him how to wave it. When the serpents drew near, the cloth quieted them, and he rested until morning among their coiled bodies. The next night Susanoo sent him into a room of centipedes and bees. Another scarf from Susuriheim made them still. On the following day, Susanoo shot a whistling arrow into a wide field and commanded Okunanushi to retrieve it. When he entered the grass, fire was set around the edges. The flames moved inward without haste. Okunanushi searched the ground and found no road. Then a field mouse appeared and spoke of a hollow beneath the earth. He stamped where it showed him, broke through the crust, and sheltered below while fire passed overhead. When the soil cooled, the mouse returned with the lost arrow held in its mouth. Susanoo had not finished testing him. He seated Okunanushi in the great hall and told him to pick insects from his hair. The hair was alive with centipedes. Susuriheim gave Okunanushi red clay and the small fruits of the muku tree. He bit the fruit and spat the clay, making it seem that he was calmly crushing the creatures. Susanoo heard the sound, believed the task was being done, and at last fell into a deep sleep. The hall settled around them. Okunanushi took Susanoo's heavy hair and tied it to the rafters. He rolled a great stone before the doorway. Then he gathered the things by which a ruler might defend and order a land, Susanoo's life-giving sword, his bow and arrows, and the heavenly-speaking Koto. Susuriheim climbed onto his back, and together they moved toward the way out of Eni-no-Kuni. The Koto brushed against a tree. Its strings gave one clear, enormous note. The hall shook. Susanoo woke and pulled against the rafters, bringing part of the house down around him in a slow thunder of wood and dust. By the time he freed his hair and moved the stone, the two fugitives had reached Yomotsu Hirosaka, the slope between the root country and the upper world. Susanoo followed to the boundary. Yet there he did not strike them down. Across the distance he called after Okunanushi. He told him to use the sword and bow against the brothers who had driven him away, to take the name Okunanushi, Great Land Master, and to build a palace where Susuriheim could dwell. The old Izumo telling turned strangely at this boundary. The pursued thief leaves with Susanoo's daughter and treasures, and the storm god sends sovereignty after him in words. Kanku-shimane.com 10. Okunanushi returned to the land above. He did not carry stolen weapons merely as spoils. They marked the end of flight. With Susuriheim beside him, he overcame the brothers who had made the earth unsafe and began the work of shaping the land into a place of settlement. The Koto's voice, once hidden in a lower hall, traveled with them into daylight. He had entered the root country with almost nothing. He came back with a companion, a new name, and the means to make a home. May the road out of darkness open toward a home that knows you. The Koto's fading note crosses cold water, where a painted mill hums beneath a northern mountain. In the far north of Song, beyond dark lakes and pine ridges, lay Pohjola beneath the rule of Louhi. Frost lingered there even when southern fields had begun to soften. Inside the mountain of copper, behind locks and roots, turned the Sampo, a many-colored mill whose labor brought lasting increase to the house that possessed it. Ilmarinen the smith had forged it long before. His hammer had rung through the northern air while fire breathed against iron. He made the Sampo at Louhi's demand, hoping to win a bride from Pohjola, and when the work was finished, Louhi hid it deep in the stone. Its painted cover revolved. From its turning came the means by which storehouses remained full and a household felt the future less sharply. Years passed. The bride was lost, the bargain brought sorrow, and the wonder Ilmarinen had made continued to enrich the northern land alone. Väinämöinen, old singer and traveler of the waters, came to believe that the Sampo's good fortune should be shared. With Ilmarinen and the restless Lemminkainen, he sailed toward Pohjola in a vessel that cut quietly through steel-colored waves. The shore rose dark ahead. Smoke lay above Louhi's halls, and the hidden mill turned under the mountain. Väinämöinen asked Louhi to divide the Sampo. She refused. Pohjola's strength rested upon it. No blade of its painted lid, no handful from its abundance, would leave her keeping. Then the three visitors chose theft. Väinämöinen took up his kantele. Its frame had been shaped by old craft, and beneath his fingers the strings gave out a music no wakeful creature could resist. He played through the hall and across the courtyards. Louhi's people lowered their heads. Servants slept beside bowls and benches. Guards leaned against spear shafts. Even Louhi's eyes closed, and the northern household entered a deep, enchanted rest. The three went to the mountain. 9 locks barred the Sampo and 10 heavy bolts held it. Ilmarinen worked them loose. The hinges were rubbed until they turned without complaint. Yet the mill had rooted itself into the earth. Its roots reached deep and held the stone around them. Lemminkainen placed his shoulders against it, but the Sampo did not move. At last they brought a great bull and set its strength against the buried roots. Earth loosened. Stone cracked gently along old seams. The painted mill came free and was carried to the ship. They raised the sail and turned toward home while Pohjola still slept. The Kalevala's song tells of the music, the locks, the rooted treasure, and the Sampo borne away across the water. Wikisource 11. For a time the sea remained calm. Then Lemminkainen, pleased by their escape, began to sing. His voice traveled over the waves and woke a crane. The startled bird cried out. Its call crossed the distance to Pohjola, and Louhi awoke to find the mountain opened and the Sampo gone. She gathered a pursuing vessel. When the chase narrowed over the water, Louhi took the shape of a vast bird and descended upon the thieves' ship. Wind pressed the sail. Claws reached for the painted lid. In the struggle, the Sampo slipped from its place and fell into the sea. The mill broke. Its larger pieces sank beyond reach, and the deep waters kept their hidden riches. Smaller fragments rode the waves toward shore. Väinämöinen walked among the wet stones and gathered what the sea returned. He carried the pieces inland and wished that from them might come growth, steadiness, and well-being for the people of Kalevala. In the poem, those shore-borne fragments become the source of increase in the land, even after the whole wonder is lost. Wikisource 12. No one possessed the complete Sampo again. Louhi lost her guarded plenty. The travelers lost the prize they had crossed the sea to take. Yet broken abundance reached a wider shore, mixed with salt and sand, and entered the patient work of fields. May even the broken portion be enough to nourish you. The lake keeps the larger fragments, while one dark fleck drifts toward a mountain of flowers and fruit. On Flower Fruit Mountain, the sea breathed below cliffs covered in blossoms, and waterfalls vanished through curtains of silver spray. Behind one of them lay the Water Curtain Cave, home of Sun Wukong and the monkey clans who had chosen him as king. Stone bowls held fruit. Pine smoke drifted near the entrance. Beyond the cave, moonlight rested on leaves broad enough to catch it. Sun Wukong had already crossed oceans in search of a way beyond death. From a hidden master he had learned transformations, cloud travel, and arts meant to lengthen life. He returned proud of what he had gained, believing the old boundary had been pushed far from him. One night, after a feast with his companions, he fell asleep upon an iron bed beneath the cave's stone roof. In the dream, two figures approached with a document bearing his name. They looped a cord around him and led him away. The path descended from the flowering mountain into a country without birdsong. Ahead stood the gates of the underworld, where clerks kept the measures of mortal lives and no creature was omitted from the written order. At the gate, Sun Wukong woke within the dream and understood where he had been taken. He protested that he had learned the secret of long life and no longer belonged on such a road. The messengers answered with their orders. Wukong's temper rose, but the night remained vast around him. He took up his staff, broke the cord, and drove the two guides ahead until they reached the halls of the 10 kings. The underworld rulers came out in alarm. They asked which immortal had entered their court so noisily. Sun Wukong gave his name and demanded to know why the dead had been sent for him. The kings consulted one another. Perhaps, they said, the wrong officer had taken the wrong soul. Perhaps two names had been confused. Their answers sounded to Wukong like doors being closed one after another. He asked for the registers. Clerks brought out the great books in which the lives of winged creatures, furred creatures, crawling creatures, and human beings had been entered. Pages whispered beneath dim lamps. Brushes lay beside inkstones worn hollow by endless use. Sun Wukong searched through the volumes until he found the section for monkeys and, within it, his own name with its appointed span. The written mark seemed very small for something that meant an ending. He took the underworld brush. First he drew a heavy line through his own entry. Then he turned the pages and struck out the names of the monkeys of Flower Fruit Mountain. Ink crossed ink. The careful order of the clerks became a field of dark strokes. The kings called for him to stop, but Sun Wukong had already shut the book and set the brush down. Now the account is finished, he told them. He left the underworld by the road he had come, not asking permission and not returning the stolen years to their columns. The journey to the west remembers the episode as one of his first great acts of defiance. He erased his own name and those of the other monkeys from the registers of life and death. Journey to the West Research, 13. Back in the Water Curtain Cave, he woke with a shout. The fruit bowls, stone tables, and familiar faces surrounded him. He told the monkeys where he had been and what he had done. They celebrated beneath the waterfall, delighted that no underworld clerk could easily summon them by the entries Wukong had spoiled. The heavenly offices would soon hear complaints. A crossed-out page could not end every law of change, and Sun Wukong's long road had many trials still ahead. Yet for that night, on the mountain above the sea, time seemed to loosen its grip. All through this remembered darkness, Tricksters have crossed guarded thresholds because something needed by life was locked away. Their hands were rarely clean, their bargains rarely simple, but each stolen gift escaped its first keeper and entered a wider world. The old longing beneath the tales is not for possession alone. It is for one more chance to carry a little light, freedom, music, wisdom, or time back across the dark. May the last page remain unturned while sleep keeps gentle watch over you. Beyond the ledger, the old night closes softly, keeping all 12 stolen gifts in its dark. Thank you for spending this hour with Where Old Gods Sleep. If this brought you a moment of peace, consider subscribing. Rest well and sleep deeply.